Welcome to the Chess Channel, the chess channel that teaches you how to do things. Today's material is not new. Once you watch it, then compare it to what you might have seen elsewhere. To date, this is going to be our 5th video, so for simplicity reasons, we have added a big 5 on the thumbnail. Today's material has been covered many times before, but who can remember exactly how things must be done? For anyone who is starting up fresh, today's material will be difficult. This is not to say if you are an advanced player, what you see today is easy. Chess theory is vast, but if we get to know some basic concepts, only then we can hope to build upon that premise. We know a rook versus a knight endgame is theoretically a draw, but sometimes create the right conditions and there might be a winner. Moving on from this concept, for many intermediate or even advanced players, the idea of having a knight and bishop is typically going to lead towards a decisive result. But if you do not know how to deliver, you will not be able to win. Do you know how to end a game in your favor using a bishop and knight against the opposition? Like we said a few seconds ago, many chess channels have produced this same problem, but how many of them actually tell you how to go about achieving a checkmate? If you are ready, why not let's do this. Let's randomly create a situation with our required parameters. We have a totally randomly selected position with the white king positioned on this square on d3, the black king situated on e5 and the knight and bishop on b1 and e3 respectively. You would be able to checkmate the black king, but before you make your first move, you do need to understand what you need to do exactly. The only way to checkmate the king is to drive him right into one of the two corners, but in this case it matters which two corners to concentrate on. It has to be the same color as the bishop. Having said this, a checkmate can also be achieved differently. If you heard elsewhere on other channels a checkmate can only be achieved by locking the opposing king into the corner, this is not entirely correct. The only way to prove this is to show. We will shortly. So in this given scenario, the main objective is to drive the king into h8, or a1, or in some cases the king at least would need to be isolated to the rim of the board. So with white to play, you need to be looking at a tactic. Any tactic to get the king to move to either one of these two corners. So let's try a few moves. Go lure the king to move somewhere. In with a check. The king backs off to e6, knight c3, king fourth to f5, bishop back to e3, king e6, king d4, king d6, a knight check from e4, king back to e6, king c5, king f5, and a key move to opt for is this knight move to f2. King back to e6, and from this point on, you need to focus. You need to be able to direct the opposing king to one of those two corners we mentioned. bf4, and if the king moves to d7, with this additional bishop move to the 6th, the idea is to push the king to the back rank. If the king returns to e6, how do you entice the king to go east? King c6 does exactly this. If the king finds this outpost on f5, king d7, and look how fast the opposing king is running out of options. He has only 3 squares to choose from. If king f6, one thing you should avoid is to rush. Bishop c7, king f5. Get the king to move east. And should you try this square on g6, you are as good as there. King e6, king g5. Return the bishop to this outpost, and with the king now forced to the rim of the board, you also need to make sure this king remains on the edge. Bishop f6 is another key move. With the king now having only 2 options, it doesn't matter where he chooses to go. If king g6, introduce this knight maneuver, and for sure it makes sense to get the king to move into h5 as opposed to h6 or h7. Once the king is now here, bring along the king as close as he can get to the opposing king. And with only one legal square available, get the king to come here, and you can already smell the checkmate. The white king should not be moved here. Both a bishop check and a knight jump into g5 will do. Let's try the latter approach. force the king back to the 5th, redirect the knight to the 6th, and with the king now again forced to the 6th, deliver this check and the rest should come together. If the king returns to h5, we would no longer be looking at any corner, but this would be the shortcut we need. This knight check is one way to confirm the checkmate, and the other one would be to do the same thing by getting the knight to check from g7. If after this bishop check on g5 the king moves to the 7th, are you at least able to put it all together? How do you get the king to move to the corner from this position? This is the move you are looking for. King g8 avoiding the corner at all costs is not going to change the end result. With f8 being off limits, after this king move to g6 is initiated, the black king is now forced to hit the very corner of the board. Once he does, if the white king does not move away from g6, the black king is restricted. A bishop check will get you there, but there is a shortcut. Moving the king to f7 changes the dynamics of where the black king can now go. With only h7 being available, after this check is initiated, once the king now is forced back to the very corner, this is how you end things, and it is finally mission accomplished. We made things look relatively easy, but take my word, they are not. When you know what you are doing, only then this task becomes not necessarily easier but less taxing. Only when you get your hands dirty maybe then you will be able to use the knight and bishop to force a checkmate. In rapid and blitz encounters, even the very skilled will have a huge mountain to climb, and in most cases, they will fall short. The real lesson today was to shed some light in how to use the bishop and knight to enforce a checkmate. Though in most cases you would need to trap the king into the corner, we have also demonstrated another way of getting there without forcing the king to find either corner. For the sake of simplicity, let's try something else, using the same initial position. In with a check, king d5. In with another check, king c6, king c4, king b7, and we know we are not doing this correctly. This king needs to be going the other way around. King d5, king a6, king c6, king a5, knight d5, king back to a6, deliver this check, king back to a5, get the king to move along, king a4, do the same with the king, king back to a5, but after this bishop move forcing now the king to move back or forth into a4. This bishop move is all you need to get this king to move into the third. Bishop c3, king to the second, knight b5, king b1. This check, king now to c1, but after the king moves in, we would have a mirror image to what we witnessed earlier. King d1, get the knight to jump there, and with the king now forced into this direction, apply this check and the end is now very near. King b1, move the king into c3, steer the king into the second, but again the end result will be a checkmate. King c2 forcing now the king into the corner, and we have the same exact picture as earlier in a mirror image situation. After king b3, forcing now the king to b1, and this is all she wrote. In wish a check, and with the king now forced once again to the very edge of the board, this is how you accomplish the checkmate, and this is how the game ends. Again, we made things look easier, but you need to keep in mind they are not. Even though getting to devise this type of checkmate is difficult, you at least now know the basic principle and concept behind this checkmate. What many say is true: practice, practice and practice again, and you hope practice makes perfect. Our next video will look at another endgame concept, so until that time comes, I look forward to seeing you again.